Hello, today I have Alan Hansell, an advisor with IBRS, who's going to share a wealth of experience in the complex topic of IT infrastructure. Alan, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, one of the things which I would like to first of all understand is, what is IT infrastructure? It means so many things to so many people. What's your definition?
Joe, you're quite right. There are many definitions of infrastructure. There's few common definitions, but I think most agree that it's core services or common services that are offered to the organisation that aren't business area specific.
Okay, so if this is common services which are not specific to any part of the business, who actually then makes the decisions on that infrastructure? Who is the final, if you will, arbitrator of what this looks like inside an organisation?
Well, like any other investment proposal, it needs a sponsor. And someone like the CIO or an IT manager might take the case forward and make the proposal to the funding body, which could be the executive, board of directors, the governance group, some group that's got the responsibility for allocating scarce funds.
Right, well, that's pretty much everybody at the moment. So again, let's say that you've been given the role of this. It's usually the CTO or the CIO. Would that be a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Okay.
Yes.
So one of the challenges that we're seeing in the current economic climate is that it's becoming incredibly difficult to get some of those use cases above the line unless they're directly tied to a very tangible, almost immediate business case. So how would an organization, CIO or CTO, get some of these infrastructure refreshes across the line in the current environment?
Well, it's a selling job, Joe. The sponsor has to find other people, other executives prepared to back the bid because it's competing for scarce money at the moment or scarce people, and the person making the bid has to win the others over, ideally by presenting a vision of what it will be like when the project is approved and how it will be realised.
Well, one of the challenges then on that one is, of course, going to be actually making that sales case. And I know that you've talked a lot internally about the challenges that these senior executives are now having. What are some of the tips that you would have about making the case to the senior executives, to the board, and then making sure that you can actually back up that business case?
Well, first of all, you have to do your homework. What's needed, why is it needed, and what benefits will be derived. They're probably intangible, occasionally tangible, but typically intangible, and what it will be like if this is not approved. Sometimes the fear factor is included in the equation.
Okay, well, let's take a look at those intangibles. Give me some examples of what they may look like and how you would then turn those into a selling proposition.
Well, let's take the case of a large agency with which I was dealing in Canberra. Had a lot of staff in remote locations, and they wanted to improve the network available to the staff. But on sheer ROI grounds, it wasn't a winner. So it had to be justified on the basis of morale. In other words, we may lose people unless we improve this service. And that's a case where the HR person has to come on board as well and support it.
Well, that's a really interesting one. So, let's drill down to that one a little bit more. The morale issue would be we've got a slow network or we've got a network that's hard to log into. What was the actual morale issue behind that?
Dissatisfaction, employee surveys saying this is an issue and a concern, and a perception that they may be losing people because they're not able to provide that support for folk in the field.
So one of the very important parts of those sort of situations that I've seen is if you don't put in a measurement system in there, a before and after, then you can get pinged down the line along, with you said it would do this, but we're still losing people. So you really need to put in some sort of a metrics. Would that be a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. You might say, well, look, we could lose up to 5% of our people if we don't do this within a year. It costs roughly this amount of money to train someone to reach a level of proficiency. We're putting that at risk, and we might have to spend more money on training. So often it's the cost avoidance as well as the OH&S aspects that will get it over the line.
Right. So once you start to get to those issues, we really are dealing with some fine nuances, and you better have some you better have a way of at least turning those fear, uncertainty, doubt issues into some tangible dollar savings somewhere along the lines. Is that it?
You're quite right. It's a leap of faith investment. And my suggestion to senior managers is they go back to the executive that has approved the proposal in, say, year, 18 months, and say, these are the benefits that have been realised because you supported that investment proposal. I believe once having done that, it adds to the credibility of the manager. So next time, their case is much more easily believed.
Yeah, so it's really important. The selling doesn't stop once you've got the investments for the infrastructure. It continues to build that trust issue.
It does. And may I suggest to managers that they make that offer when they're presenting their proposal. Look, I'm prepared to put my name on this. I'll come back 12, 18 months, 2 years' time and give you an account of what has happened.
You better get that in your diary as well.
Oh, yes. In fact, I know one organisation where this happened and the company secretary was immediately told to document that and minute it.
One of the other questions that we've had recently is around this idea of infrastructure in the cloud. So if we abstract all of our existing infrastructure and we're going to go cloud first strategy, let's say, is there as much important in trying to sell this infrastructure refresh across the line? Because theoretically you're constantly refreshing. How does this all play out with a cloud first strategy?
Well, because the cloud first strategy does need technical and architectural support, which must be factored into it. Also, people have to be very careful when they go to the cloud. I remember in New South Wales where we had the major bushfires, and that really blew all the projections for capacity with the cloud provider. That's one of the advantages of it, of course, but it also meant that had to be closely monitored to make sure it was containable.
So what we saw there was really interesting, and I remember working on that. We saw, obviously, as people went straight to working from home, you had some aspects of your environment suddenly became commoditized into the cloud. But on top of that, you had the existing on-prem infrastructure that had to burst up to support all these activities. And the logical way was to throw some of it in the cloud. So now you had new cloud consumption. So you had more cloud consumption and new cloud consumption. But here's the arguments which I was looking at. Yes, that was an additional cost. Yes, those were unexpected. But people who weren't able to do that literally could have stopped doing business. They were putting people at risk. So this was a cost across the board that was a mandatory required cost for a business resilience issue. Now, that sometimes was, I don't think that was hard to sell at the time, but we're now in a situation where it's hard to come back and justify that because there was no real governance around this situation.
That's true. But I still think people need to come back and say do a survey of employees and say, well, what benefit did you get by having a new PC or better service at your desk? And sometimes that's subjective, but it can be compelling, particularly if it's fairly widely supported.
Do you think that there's a need to also go back and look at the software asset management and the cloud asset management, cloud performance management toolkits that we've deployed? Because we've taken an absolute mini tidal wave in the last month of questions around how to do software asset management, and yet they're still not talking about the cloud asset management, the cloud service management.
Oh, agree. And of course, one has to be very careful with the cloud. I'm sorry if I'm telling you how to suck eggs, but one of the problems with the cloud is I notice people using many providers, and that gets them into difficulty with architecture, hybrid clouds. So if you're using the cloud, I think people have got to keep it fairly simple, straightforward, and if possible, avoid consumption-based billing, because that often sends the CFO into tailspins. Yes?
So Alan, given the fact that a lot of CTOs and CIOs have spent significantly over the last 6 months trying to address what was happening with the environment, they've looked at their IT infrastructure. Some of it's been moved into the cloud. A lot of it's been really segmented and split. They now have the issue of trying to continue selling the requirements for IT refresh, for IT infrastructure refresh, and yet a lot of their budget is very, very tight. What would be, say, the top 3 things you would recommend that a CIO or a CTO look at when meeting this challenge?
Consult widely, do your homework, read publications, listen to webinars, seek advice from experts or people who have learned from what others have done. Consult your own staff, involve them in team meetings where you canvass what the changes needed are. And lastly, develop a picture of the future, because it's that picture of the future that convinces people that it's doable and that we will benefit from it.
And I think one of the important things when you look at that future state is to recognise we actually might not know what it looks like. You hear this phrase uncertain times, but scenario planning and tools like that that are great morale builders as well, can actually help you figure out multiple futures and then the commonality between them. If this happens in either of these scenarios, then you would need to do this, and that then becomes a selling proposition. You have covered off the mitigation and the risks for the board as well.
You're right, because you're typically going to be asked by senior managers, well, what if this happens, what if that happens? And you'll be expected to have an answer. So you've got to anticipate those questions. So in discussing with peers, it's important to say to them, well, tell me, what are your objections? Why do you think this might not work? And let's talk about that, and let's come up with a solution. It's unwise to go to any senior management meeting without having covered off all the possibilities.
Thank you very much, Alan. That's it.
Okay.